A battlefield in Gaul. The year is 52 BC. Julius Caesar has just conquered Alesia, the last great fortress of the Gallic resistance. An entire tribe, tens of thousands of people, now falls under Roman control. The surviving men are separated. Those deemed useful will be sold as slaves to labor in mines, fields, or massive construction projects. Those considered dangerous or worthless will be executed. But there is a third group. The captured warriors with powerful physiques, men who proved their strength and will to fight, are chosen for a specific fate. They will be sent to a ludus, a gladiator school, where they will be trained to fight and die in the arena for the amusement of Roman crowds. Among the prisoners are also women and children. Their destiny will not depend on skill or courage, but on their age, appearance, and the whims of their conquerors and eventual buyers at slave markets. Some will be sold for domestic labor, others for brutal agricultural work. But those considered young and attractive will face a far darker reality. They will be kept in or near the gladiatorial ludus not as fighters, but as part of a system of reward and control, used by owners to manage their gladiators. These were men trained for death, dangerous and unpredictable. To prevent rebellion, they had to be kept just satisfied enough not to revolt, yet desperate enough to fight savagely in the arena. You won't believe what this meant for the women trapped there. Today, we uncover the grim truth of how enslaved women were used within the gladiatorial system, the roles they played inside the ludus, the cruelty they endured, and how all of it fit into Rome's wider structure of slavery and violent entertainment. To grasp their suffering, we must first understand the world of the gladiators themselves. The ludus was both a training ground and a prison. Gladiators lived there under the control of a lanista, a businessman who purchased, trained, and rented fighters for the games. Most gladiators were slaves, prisoners of war from conquered regions or convicted criminals. Occasionally, free men sold themselves into gladiatorial slavery, chasing wealth or fleeting fame. Once inside the ludus, they were property, subject to strict discipline and total control. They were valuable investments. A skilled gladiator could earn his owner a fortune, but he was also a weapon on two legs, armed, powerful, and desperate. Rebellions were a constant fear. The most famous, led by Spartacus between 73 and 71 BC, shook all of Italy for 2 long years. To maintain order, Lanisti created an intricate system of punishment and reward. Punishments included whipping, starvation, solitary confinement, or being forced into hopeless, rigged battles. Rewards, on the other hand, included better meals, small sums of money, slightly improved quarters, and most significantly, access to female company. And this is where the enslaved women came in. Large ludi kept groups of women specifically for this purpose. These women had no choice, no voice, and no escape. They were forced to interact with the gladiators as part of the so-called reward system. Their lives became a nightmare of constant vulnerability. No right to refuse, no protection, and no dignity. The system viewed them not as human beings, but as tools to control men considered far more valuable than them. Evidence of this practice survives, though ancient Roman writers rarely discussed it openly. At Pompeii, graffiti preserved by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD mentioned gladiators and women, some apparently written by women expressing affection for certain fighters. Historians still debate whether these were genuine feelings or words born from coercion. Roman satirists like Juvenal and Martial sometimes hinted that even high-class Roman women were drawn to gladiators, a scandal that outraged moralists of the time. But those accounts spoke of free women, ones who chose such relationships, not the enslaved women trapped inside the ludus. Archaeological discoveries from gladiator cemeteries reveal even more clues, exposing a hidden world where human suffering was woven into the very foundation of Rome's public entertainment, where women's pain became another cog in the empire's machine of blood and spectacle. In 2007, archaeologists uncovered a gladiator cemetery in Ephesus, in modern-day Turkey, dating back to around the 2nd century AD. Among the remains lay a young woman buried with unusual honors for a slave, suggesting she held a special position within the gladiatorial community. Isotopic analysis of her bones revealed that she had eaten the same rich diet as the gladiators themselves, far superior to that of ordinary slaves. This hinted at a higher rank within the ludus hierarchy. Historians speculate that she might have been the favored companion of a prominent gladiator, a trusted assistant within the ludus, or possibly even a female gladiator herself, though the latter remains unlikely, as women fighters were exceedingly rare. The lives of women inside the ludus varied greatly. Everything depended on the whims of the lanista, the temper of individual gladiators, and sheer luck. Some women formed genuine bonds with certain fighters, gaining a fragile layer of protection. Successful gladiators, those who survived countless battles and earned fame, often received privileges, including the right to keep a semi-permanent companion. For an enslaved woman, this could mean relative safety, shelter from unwanted advances, and perhaps slightly better treatment. But this security was built on sand. Gladiators died constantly. The mortality rate in combat was estimated between 10 and 20% per fight, depending on the type of contest and era. When a gladiator died, any protection he offered vanished instantly. For women without such alliances, life inside the ludus meant constant fear and vulnerability. They were accessible not only to the gladiators but also to guards, trainers, the lanista himself, and even visiting patrons. They had no legal rights. Under Roman law, slaves could not refuse the orders of their masters or their masters' representatives. The concept of consent simply did not exist. To Roman society, these women were property, tools to be used however the lanista saw fit. Any form of protest or resistance was met with brutal punishment, whipping, starvation, or being sold into even harsher conditions, such as labor in the mines or forced prostitution in city brothels, where life expectancy was painfully short. There was also a reproductive dimension to consider. Women kept within the ludus inevitably became pregnant. Children born from unions between enslaved women and gladiators were automatically slaves, property of the lanista. Boys could be raised and trained as the next generation of gladiators. Girls might be sold or kept to eventually replace their mothers. There was no concept of family. No law protected the bond between mother and child. A baby could be sold moments after birth if the lanista decided it was profitable. For these women, motherhood became another layer of torment, bringing life into slavery, powerless to protect their own children or promise them a future. The social stigma surrounding these women was equally devastating. Gladiators, though adored as celebrities of the arena, were also viewed as tainted and socially inferior, men stripped of honor. Even for a free woman, being associated with a gladiator was considered scandalous. For the enslaved women inside the ludus, this meant double condemnation. Slaves by law, disgraced by association. Even if they were ever granted freedom, a rare occurrence, their reputation marked them forever, making reintegration into Roman society nearly impossible. To fully understand their plight, we must view it within the vast machinery of Roman slavery itself. The Roman slave system was enormous. Historians estimate that between 20 and 30% of Italy's population during the High Empire lived in bondage. Slaves came from all corners of the conquered world: Gaul, Germania, Britain, North Africa, the Middle East, and Thrace. They filled every role in the Roman economy: servants, nurses, cooks, weavers, field hands, miners, and yes, those trapped in forced labor we would today recognize as human trafficking. The women confined to the gladiatorial ludi were merely one piece of this massive structure of exploitation. Roman law left no ambiguity. Slaves were property, entirely subject to the will of their masters. Slaves were considered property, not people. They had no rights under Roman law. A master's authority over his slaves was absolute. He held the power of life and death. Although using this power recklessly was discouraged, since it meant destroying valuable property, it remained fully legal. For enslaved women, this meant that violence against them, including intimate violence, was never recognized as a crime. They could not testify in court except under torture. They could not own property. They could not legally marry. Any union they formed was merely a contubernium, a cohabitation arrangement without legal status, dissolvable at the master's whim. There were rare cases of manumission or release from slavery. A few successful gladiators earned freedom after years of brutal service. Sometimes these freedmen bought the freedom of their companions if they had enough wealth or favor to do so, but such moments were exceptions, not the rule. The vast majority of gladiators died young, killed in the arena, struck down by infection, or weakened by constant wounds. The women within the ludi almost never escaped their bondage. Their lives were often short, crushed under exhaustion and neglect. Female gladiators, gladiatrices, did exist, but they were extremely rare. The Emperor Domitian, who ruled between 81 and 96 AD, occasionally staged female duels as an exotic novelty meant to shock audiences. Later, Emperor Septimius Severus banned gladiatrices altogether in 200 AD, suggesting the practice had become both controversial and distasteful. Still, female fighters were only a small spectacle compared to the silent majority of women tied to the games. Most were unseen victims, not participants, shadows within the machinery of blood and fame. The gladiatorial system itself began to fade with the Christianization of the Roman Empire. Emperor Constantine, the first Christian emperor, issued decrees against the games in the early 4th century AD, though enforcement remained inconsistent. The last recorded gladiatorial shows took place in the early 5th century. As the games vanished, the ludi slowly disappeared as well, along with the specific network that trapped these women within their brutal world. Yet slavery itself continued to exist throughout the empire, including forms of exploitation targeting women that would persist long after Rome's political collapse. The story of the enslaved women connected to the Gladiators exposes one of the empire's darkest contradictions. Rome built monuments, laws, and literature that shaped the foundations of Western civilization. Yet its greatness rested on the backs of those it enslaved. It was a society where human lives were measured by profit, where mass entertainment depended on ritualized death, and where the powerless were systematically consumed by the powerful. For women captured in Rome's wars of conquest, fate was never a matter of choice. Their lives were dictated by forces of economy, desire, and social hierarchy entirely beyond their control. Those who ended up inside the ludus faced an existence defined by danger, fear, and submission, with no rights, no protection, and no path to freedom. Their stories were almost entirely erased from written history. Roman chroniclers rarely considered them worth mentioning. But fragments of evidence, bones unearthed from forgotten graves, graffiti scrawled on ancient walls, and scattered records in faded ink, allow us to glimpse what was taken from them. Through these traces, we can sense the echoes of countless women whose names we will never know, yet whose lives were devoured by a system that turned suffering into spectacle.